Everyone in the airport lounge thought she was just another waitress. Polite, invisible, forgettable. But when the powerful CEO called her useless, he didn't realize the woman serving his coffee was about to decide the fate of his $2.5 billion deal. Sometimes power wears a suit. Sometimes it wears an apron. The morning hum of the VIP Skylux Airport Lounge carried a rhythm of quiet wealth. Soft jazz, clinking cups, the rustle of designer coats. A panoramic window framed the silver wings of private jets gleaming against a pale dawn sky. At table 12 sat Julian Ward, 42, every inch of him groomed ambition. His watch alone could fund someone's year of rent. His voice, crisp, commanding, carried the kind of confidence that silenced entire rooms. Today was monumental. Within hours, he would fly to New York to finalize a $2.5 billion merger that could redefine his company's future. He checked his phone for updates from his team. All clear. Yet impatience shadowed his face. The deal was everything. He couldn't afford delays, imperfections, or distractions. Across the room, Amara Hale adjusted her apron and quietly moved between tables, offering smiles that went largely unseen. Her every motion was graceful, calculated, a kind of control that came from years of learning to watch people closely. She wasn't here by coincidence. No, Amara chose to be here. This morning wasn't about serving coffee. It was about testing character. Because behind the apron and humble uniform, she wasn't a lounge employee. She was the lead investor whose firm was about to sign Julian's record-breaking deal. But before she handed him her signature, she wanted to know what kind of man she'd be partnering with. Numbers could be beautiful on paper, but integrity could never be faked. Julian glanced toward her as she approached with a pot of coffee. His eyes flicked over her name tag, Amara, without any recognition. To him she was background noise. "Refill, sir?" she asked softly. He gave a half nod, already returning to his phone. "No, please. No, thank you." Just the impatient tapping of a man too busy to see who stood before him. Amara poured, steady-handed. Steam curled between them like a veil. She remembered this posture, the tilt of his chin, the casual dismissal. It was familiar, painfully so. And deep inside, she knew this was more than a business morning. It was personal, because Julian Ward had crossed paths with her before, years ago, in a place where she had no power, no title, and no defense. It was a memory she had buried deep beneath success, one she thought had lost its sting. But standing here, watching him check his reflection in his phone screen more often than the faces around him, the past felt painfully close again. Back then, she had been a nervous 22-year-old fresh out of business school, clutching her resume like a lifeline. She had dreamt of landing her first corporate job, not for money or status, but for the chance to learn from the best. Julian Ward had been her idol then, the ruthless prodigy who built an empire from nothing. She still remembered the day she entered his glass office. The city lights reflected on the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, turning him into a silhouette of power. He had looked at her resume for all of 15 seconds before smirking. "Too soft," he'd said, almost amused. "This industry eats people like you alive. You should try something that fits your temperament. Hospitality, maybe?" Everyone in the room had laughed. She remembered standing there, cheeks burning, holding back tears as the sound of their laughter chased her out of that building. That moment broke something, but it also planted something deeper, resolve. She had promised herself that day she'd never beg for respect again. She'd earn it, and one day she'd sit across from men like Julian, not below them. And now, here she was, years later. Amara Hale had become a force in global finance, founder of Hale Venture Partners, a firm known for backing socially responsible corporations. Ironically, Julian's company had applied for her firm's largest ever investment. She hadn't planned to meet him personally, but when she saw his name on the proposal, she made a quiet decision. She wanted to see for herself if the man who once dismissed her as too soft had changed, or if he'd simply grown richer, not wiser. Now as she set his cup on the table, he didn't even look up. His focus stayed on his laptop where he rehearsed charm for his investors, the kind of charm he reserved for people who mattered. "Careful," he muttered coldly when her sleeve brushed his arm. "Watch what you're doing." "Of course." "Sir," she replied gently. For a split second, his tone, his words, even his indifference. They were identical to the man from that office years ago. Her heart tightened, but her eyes stayed calm. This was exactly why she was here. To observe, to decide, to see if power had taught him anything about humanity. Julian took a phone call, laughing with forced sincerity. "Yes, of course, I lead with empathy," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "People are our greatest asset." Amara's jaw tensed. The hypocrisy stung like salt. She turned slightly, pretending to straighten the napkins. But inside, she was watching him more closely than ever. Every gesture, every word, every lie, her test had just begun. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, painting soft gold across marble floors. Every detail of the VIP lounge whispered luxury, the scent of roasted coffee beans, the crisp rustle of newspapers, the quiet murmur of wealth moving through polished air. But at the center of it all, Julian Ward sat like a storm contained in a tailored suit. He was on another call now, voice low and assertive, the kind that made his subordinates nod faster than they could think. "No excuses, Patrick. If the numbers don't align, you align them. I don't pay for explanations. I pay for results." He ended the call, exhaled, and leaned back with satisfaction, unaware that every word had been quietly absorbed by the woman refilling cups 2 tables away. Amara's face was serene, her movements deliberate. But inside she was taking mental notes, not of business, but of character. His tone, his posture, his indifference to those around him. All of it painted the portrait of the same man she remembered. When Julian wasn't barking orders, he performed. To the world he played the visionary, the man who preached empathy, sustainability, and innovation. He knew which words looked good on a press release, and which gestures photographed well for magazines. "Leadership is about people," he said to a younger executive sitting across from him, repeating lines she had seen him quote in interviews. "You have to make every employee feel valued. Without them, there's no foundation," Amara nearly smiled. She had once believed those words. She had studied them when he was her role model, before she learned that sometimes the best performances are given off stage. As she passed by, carrying a tray of drinks for another table, Julian's gaze briefly lifted to her. Not out of gratitude, out of instinct. He noticed her confidence, the way she moved without flinching, the calm steadiness that made her presence oddly commanding for a waitress. Something about her unsettled him. "Strange," he murmured to himself. They're usually more timid, but then his ego dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. After all, what could a waitress possibly unsettle in a man like him? He turned back to his assistant. "Our investors are arriving soon. This deal is critical. $2.5 billion on the line. We can't afford a single misstep." The assistant nodded nervously, glancing at the clock. Across the room, Amara caught the reflection of Julian's polished shoes in the glass, the gleam of power that so many people bowed to. She remembered being one of them. Once, not anymore. Her lips pressed together with quiet resolve. She knew what came next, the moment that would pull the mask off his carefully constructed image. She took a breath, steadied her tray, and walked toward his table again, slower this time, deliberate in her movement, as if fate itself were giving him one last chance to show who he truly was. Julian didn't look up as she approached. He was reviewing a presentation on his laptop, its slides filled with graphs and words like vision, innovation, leadership. His fingers drummed against the table, impatient, calculating. The kind of rhythm that didn't leave room for mistakes. "Another espresso, sir?" Amara's voice was soft, respectful, almost cautious. He gave a curt nod without meeting her eyes. "Make it quick. I'm on a schedule." The words were sharp, clipped, a tone that carried years of entitlement. Amara lingered just a heartbeat longer than she needed to, setting down the tray, aligning the cup perfectly with the edge of the saucer. She wanted to see if he'd notice the care, the attention, but Julian was too busy pretending he was a man of grace on the phone again. Charming laughter echoing through the lounge. Yes, I always say. Leadership is empathy in action," he said smoothly. "My people trust me because I treat everyone equally." The irony nearly made her laugh. Instead, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile only the calm before a storm could wear. Around them, a few guests exchanged uneasy glances. They could sense the imbalance in the air, the quiet tension between a man used to being obeyed and a woman testing the limits of his self-control. Amara reached for the sugar bowl, deliberately letting the spoon clink softly against the rim. The sound broke his concentration. Julian looked up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "Can you not do that right now?" She lowered her gaze in apology. "I'm sorry, sir." He sighed, the kind of sigh that said, "You're beneath my time." Then he went back to his screen, muttering, "God, useless distractions everywhere." That word, useless, hung between them, sharp as glass. For a moment, the world around her blurred. She was 22 again, standing in that cold office as his laughter echoed in her ears. But unlike then, she didn't shrink this time. She straightened, her eyes steady. "Would you like cream with that, sir?" Her tone was polite, but there was something in her gaze, a calm intelligence that made him hesitate. Something told him this woman wasn't as invisible as he thought. He brushed it off with a dismissive wave. "Just do your job, please." Of course, her voice carried no anger, no pride, just composure. And that composure, that quiet control, began to unsettle him more than defiance ever could. As she walked away, his assistant whispered, "Sir?" "I think that's the investor's representative on the way." Julian nodded, gathering his files, unaware that the woman he had just belittled would soon be the one deciding his future. Amara glanced back once, her expression unreadable. The test was complete, the result undeniable. Now it was time for the reckoning to begin. Amara returned to Julian's table one last time, her tray steady, her expression composed. Around her, the morning bustle of the lounge had slowed to a low hum, the sound of newspapers folding, briefcases clicking shut, spoons stirring in porcelain cups. The world seemed to hold its breath. Julian was distracted, tapping at his phone, irritation simmering beneath the surface. His assistant whispered updates about the investor's arrival, but his attention was elsewhere. On control. On power, on appearances. "Your coffee, sir," Amara said softly. Placing the cup before him, he didn't even glance up. Finally, she adjusted the saucer, careful, precise. Her hand brushed the table's edge as she stepped back, and in that instant, his elbow jerked forward, knocking into the cup. The dark liquid splashed across his sleeve, staining the pale fabric. For a fraction of a second, silence. Then came the explosion. Unbelievable. Julian's voice cut through the lounge like thunder. "Are you blind?" Useless staff everywhere. Heads turned. The soft music faltered under the weight of the moment. A nearby couple froze mid-sentence. A waiter dropped a napkin. Amara didn't flinch. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something quieter, something infinitely stronger. Pity. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said, reaching for a cloth. "Don't touch it," he snapped, yanking his arm away as if her apology were contamination. "I swear this is what happens when standards drop." "Who even hired you?" Her eyes stayed calm, her voice gentle. "Please, allow me to clean it." "I said don't." His tone was sharp enough to make the receptionist wince. The entire lounge had gone silent now. Every gaze flicked between them, the powerful man and the quiet woman standing before him. Amara slowly set the cloth down. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from restraint. She had endured humiliation before, but this time it wasn't breaking her. It was revealing him. Julian shook his head in disgust, muttering under his breath, "Useless." That word again. The one that had haunted her years ago. The one that had once cut her so deeply she had rebuilt her entire life around proving it wrong. But now, as she stood in that elegant lounge with every pair of eyes watching, she realized something profound. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to him, not to anyone. "Of course, sir," she said softly. "Enjoy your flight." And with that, she turned and walked away, slow, graceful, steady. Her departure left a vacuum of silence in her wake. Even Julian's assistant looked uncomfortable, glancing at the coffee stain spreading like a bruise across his sleeve. Julian huffed, waving it off. People like that shouldn't be allowed near professionals. Useless. But deep down, a flicker of unease crawled through him. Something in her calmness, in her refusal to crumble, had unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Moments later, the front desk phone buzzed. A voice announced, "Ms. Hale, your meeting room is ready." "The investors are waiting." Julian didn't look up. He didn't realize, not yet, that the name he'd just heard belonged to the very woman he had humiliated minutes ago. But he was about to. Amara paused for a moment near the lounge entrance, her heart steady, her expression unreadable. The receptionist's voice echoed faintly again. "Ms. Hale, your guests are waiting in the private suite." The staff nearby froze. "Ms. Hale?" They looked from the receptionist to the waitress standing beside the coffee counter. Slowly, realization began to ripple through the air like an awakening. Amara unclipped her apron. The simple motion felt like shedding a disguise, like exhaling after years of holding her breath. The soft fabric fell into her hands, the symbol of invisibility, now unnecessary. She folded it carefully, set it on the counter, and straightened her posture. Her shoulders aligned, her chin lifted. The subtle transformation was startling. The meek waitress was gone. In her place stood a woman who commanded silence. A nearby attendant whispered, "Wait, that's Ms. Hale?" The manager blinked. "It can't be." But the poise, the elegance, the quiet confidence, it all fit perfectly. Amara smoothed the front of her blouse, adjusted her wristwatch, and began walking toward the side hallway leading to the conference room. Her stride was calm but powerful, each step echoing with intent. The same employees who hadn't noticed her minutes ago now watched her like she was walking in slow motion. Even the hum of conversation softened to a hush. At the far end of the lounge, Julian sat frowning at his phone, still grumbling about incompetence. He didn't notice the small procession of assistants escorting her past him, not until the reflection in his glass coffee table caught her face. He looked up, confused. She wasn't wearing the apron anymore. The same woman who'd just served him coffee now walked beside an airport executive, her name spoken with reverence, his brow furrowed. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crept into his voice. "Wait, who? Who is she?" The assistant glanced up from his tablet. "Sir, that's Amara Hale, the lead investor you're about to meet in the signing room." Julian froze. "What?" He blinked, then looked again, but she was already gone, her silhouette vanishing through the frosted glass doors at the far end of the lounge. A rush of heat climbed up his neck. His mind scrambled for logic. A joke, maybe. Some bizarre coincidence. But deep down, something in his gut told him it was true. He remembered her eyes. Calm, intelligent, unshaken even as he'd insulted her. He remembered the way she'd said, "Enjoy your flight," not like a servant, but like someone who knew exactly how the story would end. Julian's chest tightened. The arrogance in his posture began to falter. He looked down at the coffee stain on his sleeve. It had dried into the shape of an uneven ring, a mark that suddenly felt poetic. A reminder of his carelessness. The lounge fell quiet again, as though waiting for the next act in a play only she knew the ending to. Amara, now standing in the private suite, took a slow breath and looked out the window toward the runway. The jet shimmered under the noon sun, symbols of speed, ambition, escape. But she wasn't running anymore. She was arriving. The meeting was about to begin. Julian adjusted his tie, trying to shake off the uneasy chill that had crawled under his skin. The private suite doors loomed ahead, frosted glass etched with the Skylux insignia, glowing softly under recessed lighting. Behind those doors waited the most important investor of his career. He had no idea that the very woman he'd called useless was about to walk in as his equal. No, his superior. His assistant opened the door with a bright, nervous smile. "Sir, Miss Hale will be joining us shortly." Julian nodded, forcing a smile of his own. "Good, let's keep this professional. We can't afford to lose her interest. She's holding the strings to our expansion funding." But when the door opened again, and Amara Hale stepped inside, the world seemed to tilt. Gone was the modest uniform and apron. She wore a fitted black suit, minimal jewelry, and an air of quiet power that filled the room like perfume. The same steady eyes met his, but now they carried recognition, authority, and something he couldn't name. Julian's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. The assistant blinked in disbelief, glancing between them. "Mr. Ward," Amara said smoothly, extending her hand, "it's good to finally meet you. Properly." For a split second, the entire room stood suspended between shock and silence. The investors' representatives looked at one another, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. Julian slowly rose to his feet, his confident mask slipping. "Miss Hale," he stammered, his voice thinner than usual. I didn't realize that we'd met." Her tone was polite, her smile faint. "Yes, I assumed as much." The air was colder now, sharper. Amara took her seat at the head of the table, the position reserved for authority, and opened the folder before her. She didn't look at him again right away. Instead, she reviewed the documents he'd so proudly prepared, flipping each page with quiet precision. Julian stood frozen for a moment longer, unsure whether to sit or leave. He finally sank into his chair, trying to compose himself. Sweat glistened faintly at his temples. I hope everything is in order," he said, forcing confidence back into his tone. "We're eager to move forward. This partnership means a great deal to us." Amara's eyes flicked up to meet his. "Partnerships," she said softly, "should mean more than just money, Mr. Ward." He swallowed. "Of course, absolutely." Her gaze lingered on him for a heartbeat longer, not cruel, not vengeful, simply clear, like sunlight exposing what had always been there. "Tell me," she said finally, her voice steady. "How do you define leadership?" He hesitated. "Leadership?" "Yes." She folded her hands lightly. "You speak of it often. I'd like to hear it, in your own words." Julian blinked, caught off guard. He looked at his assistant, then back at her. "Well, I believe leadership is about understanding people, treating everyone with respect." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Respect," she echoed softly. He shifted uncomfortably. In that single word, in that subtle tone, the entire lounge confrontation came rushing back to him. The spilled coffee, the insult, the humiliation he had delivered without thought. Now, sitting under her calm, steady gaze, it dawned on him. He wasn't the one being interviewed anymore. He was being tested. The conference room was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the city beyond the glass walls. The same arrogant CEO who had called her useless hours ago now stood frozen before her, his jaw tight, his confidence shattered. His hand still hovered over the contract like he was unsure whether to touch it or tear it apart. Amara leaned back in her chair, calm and composed. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was Amara Vale, lead investor of Astra Holdings, the private fund Julian Ward had spent months trying to impress. The same waitress he dismissed now held the power to decide his company's future. Julian's throat tightened as realization sank in. You're the investor?" His voice cracked slightly. "The one our analysts said would finalize the $2.5 billion deal?" Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her quiet authority filled the space between them. "I am," she said softly, sliding the signed document across the table. "And I was also the waitress you called useless this morning." The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between her and Julian. The arrogance that once framed him now looked like panic. He opened his mouth, searching for words for excuses, but none came. His mind replayed every second of their earlier encounter, the spilled coffee, the dismissive smirk, the patronizing tone. Amara continued, her voice steady but not cruel. "When I came to the lounge, I wasn't testing your company's numbers." "I was testing you." She paused. "Because leadership isn't measured by performance under spotlight. It's measured by how you treat people when no one's watching." Julian swallowed hard. "Amara, I didn't know. I was stressed." "Stress doesn't create arrogance," she interrupted gently. "It reveals it." The air went still. For a long moment there was only silence, the kind that feels heavier than sound. Then Amara stood, collected her tablet, and looked him in the eye one final time. "The deal stands," she said, "but leadership will change. You'll remain for the transition, but after that, Astra will appoint someone else." Julian lowered his gaze. The man who once commanded rooms now looked small in his own office. And Amara, once invisible in an apron, was the one walking out in quiet triumph. As she reached the door, she turned slightly. "One more thing," she said with a faint smile. "You still owe me for that coffee." A ripple of restrained laughter spread across the room. Amara stepped into the corridor, her heels clicking against marble, her calm composure unshaken. Outside, the city light poured in, brilliant, forgiving, infinite. She took a deep breath. The day had come full circle. From spilled coffee to signing a multi-billion-dollar deal, she hadn't just proven her worth. She'd reminded the world that kindness and strength weren't opposites. They were power refined. In her reflection on the elevator doors, she caught a glimpse of the woman she used to be, the one who stayed silent while others underestimated her. That woman was gone. Now she wasn't waiting for permission to be seen. She was the vision. As the elevator descended, she whispered to herself, "Never underestimate the quiet ones." The doors closed, and somewhere far above, a CEO stared at the stain on his cuff, the same coffee mark that started it all, realizing that some messes never wash off. Remember this, you won't always be the one testing or judging others. One day, you will be tested too. Amara's story reminds us that real power isn't about money, titles, or loud voices. It's about character. Never look down on someone because of where they are today. Life has a way of turning tables when you least expect it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Reddit Storyteller, where every story reminds us that fate always finds its balance. Until next time. Stay kind, stay humble, and remember, respect costs nothing, but it means everything.